All right. It is my pleasure to introduce Josh and Luke Younggren. They hate me for putting them early, but I thought it would be an extra challenge for you because visually now you have to figure out which one is which. So you're never going to be quite sure. Josh and Luke are the creators of evolvinghockey.com. Hopefully you're familiar with that site. It's a resource that provides advanced NHL statistics to the public. They also contribute to hockeygraphs.com. And just like you don't know who they are now, you all right? You don't know who they are on their Twitter either, so always a challenge. They're going to speak to us about expected goals in the NHL, a review from 2004 to 2020. Welcome, Josh and Luke.
Thank you. All right, so just for reference, we got Luke on the left, so you're good.
Stage left.
Yeah, stage left, sorry.
To make it more complicated. All right. Hey, everybody, I'm Luke.
I'm Josh.
And as Allison said, we're the creators of evolvinghockey.com and the Evolving Wild Twins on Twitter. First of all, I just want to thank Allison for all the work she's put in to do this. We'll try to keep it short, or Allison may end us. So, all right. So expected goals in hockey, a review 2004 through 2020. Really, our motivation for making this presentation was we just wanted to make a lot of XG models. So we've been working with expected goals in the NHL for several years now, and in doing so, we've obviously looked back at all the prior methods that have been made or done and the different modeling techniques, and we found it very interesting the way the models differ and the different techniques that you can have. So yeah, that's basically the overview. Here's a lot of random pictures, but yeah.
All right, so expected goals, what is it exactly? The idea of it is it starts with it's a binary classification problem. So we're trying to predict goal probability. We have either a yes or no. Did a shot become a goal? That's our model. And we use the NHL's RTSS or HITS data for this. It's a shot-by-shot data set you can see on the right here. This is a very cropped version. I hope that this isn't too small, but you can see that we have it set up where this is basically what the design or model matrix looks like, where we have one column that's a bunch of, or each row is a bunch of shots, and the column on the left is our target variable. So that's what we want to predict. We want to figure out, is it a goal or not? And on the right, we have all our features, so we get shot distance, angle, all that stuff we'll get into in a little bit. Use historically has been for player team evaluation. It's also been shown that XG is fairly predictive of future team winning or goal scoring, so it's something that's been pretty valued overall, just looking at how good is a player, how good is a team, and do we expect that to continue? The other added benefit is it also helps us evaluate skater defense a little bit better because we're able to separate out skaters from goalies because we're not relying on goals, which we know are fairly noisy and random, especially in the against version. We can look at the quality of chances that skaters are allowing when they're on the ice. And then we also are able to look at shooting percentage or shooting ability depending on what version you want. And then from our experience, XG or expected goals kind of end up being a pretty bedrock metric in a lot of either player evaluation metrics or just in general for journalists or writers. It's a pretty good overall look at, from what we have, the data, how good a player is. So brief history. I don't have a ton of time to dig into this too much. I just wanted to put up some of the kind of keynote stuff that's been done. The first one, it's very fascinating to go back and look at Alan Ryder's paper from 2004, which is kind of the first thing that looked at this from what we can find. The stuff on the left here was before XG really kind of got the name XG or expected goals. It was kind of the idea of shot quality. So we're trying to look at how good are, shots from different areas, what's the average scoring percentage, shooting percentage, all that stuff. So Alan Ryder's paper, we actually will get into it. We have a model that we based on his paper from 2004 as one of our baseline methods. And then on the right is kind of more in the more modern era. Brian McDonald's paper from 2012 from Sloan was we kind of consider them, kind of brought XG into the modern era. It was called expected goals in the title. After that, Dawson and Ozma's paper was what a lot of people point to now that showed XG is very predictive. After that, Manny, his model on Corsica, Peter Tanner on Money Puck, and then Cole, Matt, and Harry added additional things, and then we had a paper from 2018.
All right, so, okay, there we go. All right, so the data we're using, as mentioned before, is from the RTSS system or the HIT system. And we wrote a scraper in R, the R statistical programming language. It's on GitHub. And So we're looking at all Fenwick shots, so that's goals, misses, and saved, shots that were saved. And the reason for that is that Corsi shots are not recorded with the location of the shooter. They're recorded where the shot was blocked, so that's not really helpful in this case, so we are not using Corsi events. And then also we have block shots, takeaways, giveaways, face-offs, and hits that will be used a little bit in the more complicated models. And then each shot has an attribute of being a snapshot, a wrist shot, all of those good things. And then, as always, we have to do a lot of cleaning, just so very high level. So first of all shots without coordinates are removed. And then second of all, the distance and angle calculations. So we assume that all shots were taken from below the center line. And the reason for this is because of the way that the data is recorded. Teams flip sides for each period, and it's not standardized across all NHL arenas. So we assume that a shot was taken. We assume that a shot was taken from below the center line, but then we rely on the NHL's recorded zone to determine long shots. So if a shot was, say, recorded at 120 feet in the defensive zone, we're going to assume that that is correct. Sometimes it's not, but overall we found that it is correct. So that's the first thing, and that goes for angle. And then here are available predictor variables. So as mentioned, distance, angle, shot type, and then score state, game strength, and then also the more important thing is the prior events, and that is something that we add in with the more complicated models, but that's kind of like Money Puck's model incorporates prior events, and he does some feature engineering there, and then also our model on Evolving Hockey also incorporates prior events, which helps the model kind of try to estimate like rush and rebound in a more fluid and kind of continuous way.
All right, so take a little. Okay, all right. I won't turn it off again. So getting into the modeling here, we, as Luke mentioned at the front, we wanted to make a bunch of XG models, and these are kind of based on historical models that have been around and also the ones that are current. So our first model we are calling, it's our baseline model 0, as we defined it, is we're just taking shot distance. We know that shot distance is very important in these models, so that's it. That's just our predictor. That's the only feature we're using is just shot distance to model goal probability. Our second one, Alan Ryder model, this is the model that he proposed in 2004. On the left, just a note, we have mostly it's just logistic regression is what we're using, which is a pretty common modeling tool or algorithm that's used for binary classification problems. With this, we're using shot distance, but we also have score state, and then game time or game seconds period, and then also shot type. So this was all that was available back in the 2002-2003 season, which is the model that he did, and it actually is pretty good. So that's our second, or I guess model 1, and then the third one is kind of in line with the model that Brian McDonald proposed in 2012, and I believe it's pretty similar to the model that's available on Natural Stat Trick from Brad. Also logistic regression, same features from before, but we're also going to do some polynomial transformations on distance and angle, and then we have those rush and rebound indicators that I think Luke mentioned, but they're binary features. So we define a rebound as a shot that occurs within 2 seconds of a prior shot, and then a rush shot is something that occurred, within 6 seconds after an event in the defensive zone or any giveaway or takeaway. This is essentially just for the model to be able to better handle that from a logistic regression standpoint. Our model 3 is we call GLMNet, which is a package in R. This is regularized logistic regression, so we have access to ridge and lasso, some other tuning parameters that we're able to better kind of add in some things that control for overfitting, those type of things. And in this model, we're going to include prior events. So what happened before a shot, and we're able to do that in this model, which is a little bit more advanced. And then the final model we're making is kind of in line with the model that we built and is on Evolving Hockey, and also that Peter Tanner provides on Money Puck. It's called XG Boost. It's a gradient boosting model. So now we're firmly in kind of what people would call machine learning, or in a pretty advanced sense. And we're actually not including the rush or rebound indicators anymore, because we're just going to include coordinates, because the model itself, the algorithm is able to handle kind of non-linear features. So things that are on an XY grid, we're building kind of decision trees is what the model is built that way, and just simply it is able to build paths through the data that can find things that we don't necessarily aren't able to do as well with logistic regression. And then quickly, our evaluation here, we built these models on time frame of the 15-16 season through the 17-18 season. We're just doing 5-on-5. We don't have a lot of time to talk about power players shorthanded, but that's something to consider as well. And this left us with about 250,000 observations. So it's a pretty robust data set. The metrics we're using for evaluation, area under the curve of the ROC or ROC curve is our main one. That's what we tune on. And then we also are going to look at the logarithmic loss. But there's a lot of other evaluation metrics that we can use. We tried a few more, and we found for the most part that they're all kind of similar in this case. Talk to us later about it if you want, but AUC is the one that we tune to. And then our methods, in-sample cross-validation. So within our 3-year data set, we're going to take 80% of that data, train the model, see how it works on the other 20%, do that a bunch of times, aggregate the results. That's kind of how we tune and optimize these. And then we also, because we're building these on a couple years before, we have the 18-19 and 19-20 season to evaluate on as well. All right, so this is, as I mentioned, our in-sample cross-validation results. We start with shot distance, and you can see right now our baseline is like 729, I believe, for AUC. And our next model is the rider model. The results here are basically it's the distribution of our each cross validation tune train kind of thing. So you can see for the most part the AUC is right in the center, and then we have our spread of where we would expect maybe the AUC to come out in given 200 runs. So when we add in with the rider model shot type and score state and game periods, or game period and game seconds, we get a little bit better. We go up 7.429. And then the GeoM base, or something that's similar to the Brian McDonald's original method or the model on natural stat trick, we see a big improvement as well when we include rush and rebound. And as everybody knows, rush and rebound shots have a high goal probability for the most part. So when we add in just a simple identifier for whether or not a shot would be that, we can see that our model improves. And then the thing that was interesting for us is when we go to a kind of more advanced model like GeoMNet, that's a regularized logistic regression, and we include a bunch of prior events, we don't actually see that much of an improvement, because logistic regression on its own is not, I don't want to say it's simple, but sometimes we need a better tool. So if we go to the XGBoost model, we see that we're up to essentially our best results here. So on the right here, we have our tables. The top one is, I think these are displayed right, yeah. So the top one is our kind of in-sample cross-validation. So in those 3 years, the 80-20 split, that's what we get. And we can see also looking at future seasons that the order, as we get more complex with the model, we get generally better results from our AUC. I think I forgot to mention earlier, but AUC is 0 to 1, and as you get higher, it's better. Log loss is as you go lower, it's better. So we see the order is essentially more complex, more features, better results. Oh, and I guess, yeah, lastly, this is the ROC curve, in case we had to put this in here just, because we knew that people would ask about it. But this is where AUC comes from, is the area under the curve. So on the right side of the curve, that's the area within 1. So you can see that on that case, they're all fairly similar as well.
All right, so now we're going to get into some comparisons of the model. So I skipped ahead, I think. Yes, I did. All right, so this is a correlation matrix of all of the shots in our out-of-sample data set, so in the 18-19 and 19-20 season. And this is comparing at a shot level what the models look like. So if you look at the plots, you can see the models do look fairly different from a single shot level. And then on the right diagonal, the correlations, though, are decent enough at this level. So a lot of the time, there's a lot of data points. There's about 140,000 shots here. So we don't have an alpha, so it's kind of hard to see the actual density of those comparisons. But if we move to calculating skaters on ice performance, we can see that all of the models actually, from a per 60 standpoint, so summing all the expected goals for or against and then dividing by time on ice, multiplying by 60, they end up looking very, very similar from a per 60 standpoint. And the reason for that is if we move to an expected goals per Fenwick event, so average expected goal, so total XG divided by total Fenwick shots, we can see they do diverge. And the reason for that is that a lot of expected goals, when you sum them, all of the Fenwick shots are going to be the same for all 5 models. So a lot of what we're seeing there is just specifically because the Fenwick rates are the same for each of the models. So we can see here that the more advanced algorithms, which are the 3 on the bottom right, are actually much more similar than the very simple shot distance and rider model. And then if we look at team performance, so this is expected goals percentage, so this is XGF divided by XGF plus XGA. From a ranking standpoint, the models look, again, very similar, but if we move to a per Fenwick shot rating, we can see that they do diverge quite significantly in some cases. So Carolina, for instance, is almost below average in the simpler models, but once you add more additional features and make more model complexity, they actually start to look a little better. And then just quickly, because we have 5 minutes, the magnitude, this is when you sum all of the XG values. So we can see that as very quickly the model complexity increases, you actually get more total XG in the league, which is something that you may notice if you look at more different models, you might get a different sum XG. So.
All right, and again, quickly, we want to show our calibration and heat maps here. The calibration is just the idea of if you take a bunch of 10% XG shots, do 10% of those actually become goals? So we can see for the most part that they're actually, all the models are fairly well calibrated up until about 20%, and then quickly, it's important to note that about like 95% of all shots in the data set have about a like under or around like below 20% XG value. So for the most part, the models are pretty well correlated, and we get the better results overall from the more complicated models as a result of it better that model being better calibrated over that 20%. And then just the heat maps here, this is just to quickly kind of give you an idea of what we're looking at here. So this is the rank we binned, average XG value within a 2-foot range on the ice. So we have little squares, as you can see, and each one of those is our average XG for each model. We have the gradient here. White is average Fenwick shooting percentage, so it's about 5.8%, somewhere around there. So we can see with shot distance and rider, we have a nice, smooth half circle right around the net. That's it. That's just a reflection of shot distance for the most part. Next, we can see our GLM, which again is the Brian McDonald, the natural stat trick model for the most part, and then GLM net. Because we're adding angle in here, so we're removing essentially kind of that area that is kind of right perpendicular with the goal line, pretty far out, and it's just pushing it all towards right in front of the net. And then if we move to the XG Boost model, we can actually start to see what some people would consider maybe like the home plate area. That's a pretty conventional idea within hockey. We kind of feel this looks a little bit more like maybe a baseball field as opposed to home plate, which I think makes more sense. I mean, home plate, the idea of moving to the top of the faceoff circle, I think if you actually think about it, it is more like an arc as we're seeing between the faceoff dots. So generally, as you get better here, we can start to see that the model is doing a better job of kind of classifying goals and how those goals, or how those shots, I suppose, the dangerous areas on the ice.
All right, and then wrapping up quickly. So one thing to talk about is the biases in the model. So the first biggest thing we noticed when we made our first XG Boost model, or gradient boosting model last season, we did not notice that the way the NHL records a lot of bang-bang plays is in the same second. And so if you have a goal that it happens immediately after another shot, it'll be recorded in the same second because they don't have access to recording milliseconds. And what that ends up doing in a gradient boosting model is that there's enough instances of that happening where the model is able to identify that if a shot was recorded in the same second, very, very close to another shot, the next shot, it's going to assign a very, very high goal probability. And what we ended up seeing is out of sample, we would get XG values of over 90%, 95% even, and all of those were goals, which is an issue because it's the model basically, what would be the word? It's identifying a very significant flaw in the data because that is not a good thing. Essentially, we're getting some data bleed there, and so what we've done is we've adjusted all prior events to be at least 1 second prior. So that's just kind of something to note. Additional distance and rink bias, as noted with the coordinate issue earlier this season. If the NHL changes the way that they're tracking their coordinates, it's going to impact all of the XG models. So that's just something to note. And then shots from behind the goal line, quickly. This is our out of sample data set, so about 140,000 shots. There's only 800 about 0.6% shots are taken from behind the goal line, but those shots in general have about an 8 to 9% shooting, just raw shooting percentage. And so it's just something to note that in the more advanced algorithms, if you have a shot taken from behind the goal line, a lot of the time it's an accidental tip or it deflected in off the goalie. It was supposed to be a pass and it somehow got in the goal. So that's kind of something we can't really avoid because if it was a goal, it's a shot. And it might not have been intended to be a shot, but it ended up in the goal, and that's considered a shot. So it's only 0.6% of all shots, and it's very evenly spread throughout all teams and all of the league. So we don't really, we're not super concerned about it, but it's just something to know.
All right, and then very quickly, some takeaways here that we wanted to kind of leave you with. Just the first one is objective. So what are you trying to do with your model that you're making? Are you as we were doing here? Are you trying to best predict goal probability, or do you want something that's maybe a little bit more interpretable? If you go to an XGBoost model, and we didn't have time to really dive into this too much, but it's kind of a black box for the most part. You're going to get some feature importance and some variable importance. You're going to be able to look at the things that are most important, but it might not be the most actionable if you go to a team or a player and say, hey, do this in this area, that kind of thing, because we can't really see the relationships as well. So if you want something that's more interpretable, as you mentioned, or as we mentioned before, the standard Brian McDonald and Asher Satrick model is going to be something that you can really dig into. It's going to take a little bit less time. It's still pretty good. It's not quite as good as the machine learning model that does do a little a better job if we look at properly evaluating the model. So it's just something to keep in mind when you're building this is what is your use. The second note is the data. So the time frame here, we use 3 years. We actually found a 3-year model for XGBoost is fairly similar to our 9-year model that we train on our website, and it's just something that it took us like 3.5 weeks to train that model on 9 years. So do we need that if a 3-year model is better? And another note here is also we thought about, and I think it could be a better idea, instead of building one model for a very long time frame to apply to everything, maybe build a bunch of 3-year models and roll them. So do 3 years, predict the next year. Do the next 3 years, predict the next year, I think is probably a better structure in this case. And then, again, the time performance trade-off, do you have a month? Do you have 3 weeks to train one model, or is it something that you need quickly? If generally more complex is going to be better, but not as complex is still pretty good. So just important to keep in mind what you're doing and who your audience is and what you're essentially trying to accomplish. And I don't think we have time for the future, so I think we're gonna leave it there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.